Hey guys, Luton here, welcome back for some more Below the Line, and this is episode 40 of Below the Line. Quite surprised we've got to 40 episodes of this series, and I've been pleased that it's going so well. If you're new to the series, this is the show where I pose a topic for you guys to discuss in the comments down below. You do so, and then I pick out the best comments for the next week's video, which we then look at. This week, leaning in-game. Can we just take it as read that at this point, leaning in FPS should be just default? There was a time where being able to lean your character in FPS was something that was only for simulation models, but at this point, when picking up Far Cry 5 this week, within the first 10 minutes of playing, I immediately felt uncomfortable, suffocated by the lack of movement. And I know suffocated makes no sense there, but what I'm getting at is that feeling, the feeling of like your kind of skin crawling discomfort that gets worse as you go along. But look, I'm not having a crack at Far Cry 5 because I actually so far enjoy the game for what it is, which is some standard Far Cry fare. I mean, it's Far Cry, it is what it is. But the question today, should leaning mechanics now be the norm and expected, not just something special for games that want to enhance the movement of players? It's heading that way already with stuff like Siege, Squad, Postscriptum, of course Armor have that functionality. But shouldn't we just expect it at this point? It's such a powerful mechanic for an FPS to have the ability to peek a corner or enhance your angle on an enemy who's in an awkward position. When you regularly play games with leaning and then you go back to those without, it feels very debilitating. Even the more arcade titles like Battlefield and something more single player orientated like Far Cry could essentially benefit from the likes of leaning. And it's true, they have some iteration of this with the peek mechanic that essentially does the job of leaning, but just automatically when you approach a corner or surface allows you to pop out when you ADS. But somehow it's just not the same, because the benefit of leaning yourself at any time means that you don't have to then be butted up against a surface in order to do it, which often when you're inside of a building, you know, it's not very preferable to have to necessarily do that. You want to be able to sit back. Sitting right up against objects then peeking out is a fantastic way to silhouette yourself and present a very nice target for snipers and marksmen. Sitting further back into a room, minimizing yourself as a target and narrowing that line of sight is a much more appealing option. Having the ability to do this also with leaning gives you strong options for engaging your enemy. And the same thing applies when you're out in open terrain, seeking, say, a defilade position. Being able to lean and peek behind pieces of cover without necessarily having to sit right on top of that object, again, gives you a strong line of sight option, improving your survivability, and that makes it harder for the enemy to engage you. All that aside, though, it just simply feels better. It's more comfortable, it feels more natural, and it enhances the flow of gunplay, especially in close quarter battle. So that's my discussion point for today, guys. Tell me what you think about leaning. Is it a vital mechanic at this point that we should demand as mandatory in FPS games, or is it an enhancement extra that is best left reserved for more serious tactical shooters? I'll pick out the best ones for next week's video, and if you're going to leave a longer comment, guys, I encourage it, I love it, but please make sure you format it, put line breaks. I can't read gigantic blocks of text. So now we come to part 2 of Below the Line, and this is where we discuss your comments from the previous week's topic. And last time we were talking about gaming addiction, but specifically about the way in which people get kind of addicted to these highs of games, where a new game comes out, something like Sea of Thieves, everybody jumps on board, then 2 weeks later it's abandoned and dropped like a rock. And I was asking the question, is it that people are just constantly riding that new wave high? They love that feeling of getting into a new game, new experience, they ride it out, and then a couple of weeks later they're bored of it? Or is it that people are like genuinely striving to find any games that they enjoy? They think this is a game that they're going to enjoy. They see a lot of streamers playing it, they see a lot of people playing the game, they hear about it a lot, it's in all the news, and then they think, oh yeah, this is the game that I need to play. They get into the game and they find out it's not quite what it was set up to be. Warner comes in and says, it's certainly interesting, this new buzz angle. Part of me wants to compare it to music, as that is my expertise. Obviously everyone is different, but just because your friend is really enjoying a pop song at the moment doesn't mean they've stopped being a grunge kid. I look at these games as welcome vacations to a new country. I think at its core, this is an argument about style versus substance. And I know for a fact you reside in the substance world, don't care for the rest. It's not actually true. I'll talk about that in a minute, but he says, it's cool, I have a few of you in my squad. squad, but I also have people who like me, whose motto is style as substance. Sea of Thieves is about aesthetics. I even said on day one of playing, I never felt like this on Assassin's Creed's boats, and the only comparable genre that I can think of, it's the aesthetics. I play for the sound of the wind in my Turtle Beach, and I'm instantly transported. Sure, you can argue that it's a reskin, a mask, reboot of sorts in the vein of Elite Dangerous on the sea, but for some reason, and I'm a sci-fi space lover by the way, I hate Elite Dangerous. This is my sunny, old-fashioned escape from the dreary, even though I live in Palm Tree Paradise. Modern Control Metropolis of 2018. I think if Rare is smart with drip-feeding new surprises like Fortnite does, the game will stick. Also, colours are making a comeback. Fortnite, Overwatch, Rocket League, Sea of Thieves, and frankly, I welcome it. In a washed-out, bland and Zack Snyder world, there you go, back to the long comments. Well look, here's the thing. Warner's quite a regular contributor here, and I'm normally fairly on board with his comments, but there's a few elements I don't disagree with here. I am not all about the substance. In fact, as an illustrator and a designer, I love aesthetic. Aesthetic is very, very important to me. But I think often people have gotten the wrong takeaway in some of my videos, and perhaps that's my fault, in that when I talk about visuals in games, I often denigrate it, and I often say this isn't the most important thing. But the thing is, aesthetics are always important. They're just not as important as mechanics. And often I get frustrated when I see people losing their mind over aesthetics and so on, but they're not actually focusing on what are the important elements. Because something that I've always said, which is that whenever I play a new game, the way I think of a new game when I look at it first is, I think, what would this game be like if it was just grey polygons everywhere? It was just a grey environment. Would the gameplay still be interesting? Would the gameplay still be fun? And what this takes me back to was in Battlefield 4, when they were doing the level design, they were doing the community level design. What got me there was that when they were testing that, they actually allowed a public test in essentially what was a grey polygon environment. And you know what? It was still extremely fun. And that's what got me to thinking this way, was that we still had a lot of fun, even though there were no aesthetics whatsoever. There was no real visuals whatsoever. It was just a grey polygon environment. And you still had the player models and everything like that. I've often used the example of indie games as well, because indie games often have a lot of mechanical substance. They have a lot going on with them, and they have a lot of narrative style or whatever, but they're usually very fun, usually enjoyable, but they don't have to have groundbreaking, revolutionary graphics, because it's just not important. So my point is, I love aesthetics. Sometimes I will go and see a movie, for example, well known to be not a particularly good story, but I want to go see it because I know it might be really aesthetically interesting. So for me, aesthetics are up there. Aesthetic is an important thing, but all I'm saying is it's just not as important. But if you want to talk about Sea of Thieves, it's a nice enough looking game. The sea looks very nice. The sea does look very good. The sea looks probably one of the best seas I've seen in any game. But beyond that, you can take it or leave it, quite honestly. I don't see anything beyond that which I find particularly revolutionary. From all the praise that Sea of Thieves has gotten, and look, I've got to be real and hold my hands up and say I haven't played it, but I have watched plenty of it. But as somebody said the other day, it's one of those games people feeling like you've just got to actually play it to feel it. I don't want to shell out 50 quid to play that game, so at the end of the day, that's where I am on it. Ark says, as someone who has been burned many times from games that looked promising but failed to deliver, I can safely say that I can no longer get hyped for any upcoming releases, no matter how much marketing and community hype is put into them. I kind of feel the same personally. Games like Division, Wildlands, Lawbreakers, they can look very good, but most of the time there's either some poor game design, game-breaking bugs, awful business model, or the player base is dead in months. And of course, Season Passes DLC might make the game not a good choice at launch, but much better after a year or so. So why would you pick up a game earlier and get a worse experience when 6 months or so later the game is much more enjoyable to play? Therefore, I don't see the reason in getting hyped for any game or picking it up day one and just wait for decent reviewers to get honest opinions about the game before I even consider buying them. I may keep an eye on games I might be interested in until I decide to buy or ditch them, provided they interest me enough. Unless it's Arma 4, of course, I need to pick that up on day one. But it's interesting how much people feel the need to really jump in on things when there is real no need. You can see these games played, you can see streamers play these games, you can watch it on YouTube, you can find out about the game, and then you can make your own best decision off of it. But really what people need to keep in mind is at the end of the day, whether you're a Twitch producer or YouTube or whatever it is, and you're having early access to a game and the devs have given you a key to play, and maybe you're playing before release, basically it's on you to give the viewer the most objective impression that you can do, and you shouldn't feel that you can't criticize a game. If you do feel that, then it means the developers have basically compromised you, and if they do say to people like, we're not going to work with you because you criticized our game or whatever, well then, that's unacceptable. In the same way that people, developers which only allow reviews day one, like basically at release, they won't allow you to review the game before release, that's always seen as quite a negative thing, because obviously if they're doing that, you have to question their motives there, like why are they doing it? It's because of course that, they didn't want people to criticize the game before it comes out in case it, perhaps impedes any of their sales and what have you. But the whole hype thing and the whole season pass thing in terms of pushing and selling that, like I say, a while back there actually was some purpose to pre-selling games, because back then you recall that obviously a lot more physical copies, and even, obviously a lot of consoles still do physical copies as well, and with physical copies there was the genuine possibility that when you were trying to get a new game, that game may run out. But here's the thing, with pre-orders for games, pre-orders actually, I've spoken about this before, pre-orders back in the day actually didn't used to be even purchase pre-orders. Usually you might put down a small sum, but a lot of the time when you're going to like game shops, you wouldn't even have to put down any money. You just go into the game shop and essentially reserve a copy. That's all a pre-order was. You would go into a game shop and you would say, I'd like to reserve a copy of this game, right? And the guy would go, fine, here you go. He'd print you out a piece of paper and say, there's your, your receipt or whatever for your copy of the game. You come in on the day and you get it. Now, if you don't arrive at the store by say like 2 p.m, 3 p.m, then usually the store would offer those games that hadn't been purchased then to anybody else who wanted to purchase them. And that was basically a way for you to secure your copy of the game, so that, hey, if it came round to the day of release and you've been speaking to people and you change your mind, well, you could just not purchase it. But now the way they do pre-orders, they try to bundle in all these extra things that you want to have, and they're basically trying to kind of, just motivate you to purchase the game before it comes out. So pre-orders I don't think are a good thing. Season passes I've talked about before, don't think they're a good thing. But, ultimately, I've said so many times, if you're not sure, even if you're a little unsure, just wait a week, because a week, even a few days now, is usually enough to know whether or not any issues you're concerned about in the game will basically pan out. Okay, back to the comments then. Sinian says, late 2017 to early 2018 has seemed to be a big turning point for video games, especially with growing popularity of games like Fortnite and Sea of Thieves. What I'm worried about is big game developers shifting the target audience from more committed gamers to much less committed gamers, who would pick up a game after seeing their favourite YouTuber, Twitch streamer, whatever, play it, but then after less than a week, they've already given up on the game. I would actually say it's almost already the case. This might mean that game devs will be trying to design their games for short-term hype and success, rather than focusing on maintaining a loyal and stable player base. It's an interesting thought, and it does play into the way in which people are playing games, but I think at the end of the day you've got to try and remember that whilst some game developers do have maybe executives or producers over their head who want to try and make the most money they can, they want to make the most, sort of proper decisions they can, at the end of the day the people that are working inside those development studios are still basically people who care a lot about what they're doing. I've spoken about this a lot, that a lot of the time the issue with games more often than not seems to be with the producers, not actually the developers, which is why I really enjoy studios like Frontier, who are basically self-published now. Okay, so they do like Elite Dangerous, they do like Planet Coaster and the upcoming Jurassic World, and they don't have a producer over them. They just produce their own games. It's kind of like what's so good about indie games as well, because they basically are beholden only to the people playing their games. And you see that it has a big impact. That's why you have games like Squad and Insurgency, and you also have like Postscriptum coming up, and those games are developing a long-term player base. Also stuff like Star Citizen, because their player bases are what allows them to exist, whereas these big companies which have big producers over the top of them like EA and Ubisoft, again, yeah, they are more likely to just write it off and turn I mean, you've seen this already with EA in the way that they've shut down some studios and so on, because they just look at what's profitable. They don't care that much about maybe what's going on with the game. If it's not making enough money, or it fails, or something happens, they'll make a harsh business decision there. So I would say in some ways it just seems to have less heart. But in terms of where they look at the way people play and then make a decision based off of that in terms of how to make games, make it like a short-term experience, it's like a burst of action and enthusiasm and it's kind of new ideas and then they move on to another thing, yeah, I could completely see that happening, because I think they do see these kind of hype and the big sales, but I don't think that's what their goal is most of the time. I think their goal more often than not is to try get into that kind of mobile system, have a game which is like an ongoing brand that they can milk through microtransactions and micro DLCs and all these kind of things. That's really, I think, their ultimate goal for most of these big companies now. They want something which they can basically farm. They want repeatable income off of a product. And this is something which has been spoken about a lot as well, is that a lot of games now, especially in the RPG sphere as well, they're built to basically harvest from the player base money. They're not built so that longevity. A lot of companies do actually want games which have longevity, so they can actually continue to farm funds and finances off of that player base. Okay, Anfrap comes in and says, short-term highs, games have short shelf lives. This isn't a coincidence. This is exactly the position that the big publishers want the gaming community to be in. Fast cash, lack of content, it's going to be forgotten. Hardline, Friday the 13th, every COD. Name half the games on Twitch in the last 12 months. Anybody? This to me is a direct result of early access, staggered content releases and so on. How many games provide content that actually lasts more than 6, 3, 2, even 1 month, weeks, even days? Games get really old really fast due to the lack of content these days. They're too similar to peer releases on the same engine, survival stuff, zombie, battle royale to name but 2 recent examples. Maybe even Twitch with streamer access. The only thing it guarantees is a flow of cash up the chain to the likes of EA, although they are not the only guilty parties, they just set an example. 30, 40, 50 pounds seems like a disposable amount of money these days when the audience they essentially target are ones who are generally funded by the bank of mum and dad. Then there's the expansions, loot boxes, and so on. Player retention doesn't seem to be that high on the list anymore, and unfortunately when an indie developer with a copy of Unreal, CryEngine or something else can make a life-changing amount of money quite quickly in the scheme of things, whilst following the latest trend using standard engine assets and limited programming knowledge, some successes like Squad, and maybe arguably to a point Star Citizen, when our community backed from the beginning, this is the future with no publisher, like I was just saying a minute ago. It says, do EA and the like know this already? I fear they do, and hence the scramble for cash. They've realised that they're going to potentially be irrelevant down the line. The cynic in me says this, so I threw a bit myself in there. It says the only games which will succeed in my opinion will be replayable and have a player base that isn't separated by money, have a solid engine and isn't just a mishmash of last year's titles, sandbox or similar. I'm old and pre-internet, gone from copying Spectrum games onto a tape deck as well, Steam Origin Early Access, so I've seen what it's become, especially in an instant 24/7 world, but this again is an example of what many gamers don't get. It's a gaming industry, aka a business. An estimated 1/6 of our planet, 1 billion play games of some form, so therefore it's now based, unfortunately, at the detriment of games on profit and quarterlies like the movie, music, hell, any industry where overnight successes or failures are now the norm. Love the below the line videos, don't always agree but keep it on LT. Well, here's the thing with this series, the whole point is to hear other people's points of view. It's not just about blindly agreeing with me, it's a discussion. It's just interesting to hear people's perspectives, and providing people make those perspectives constructive and well made, I'm happy to discuss them. But yeah, when it comes to the games industry, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of people again seem to be thinking about this, and that's why I bring up these topics, because it's often conversations that aren't being had, and I kind of want to hear where people are on it. And I think more often than not, people understand that it's a business, but you don't often hear people saying like, you know, really what's their intention? What's the developer's intention? Where are they going with this? What's their plan? And then, you know, what's going to happen down the road? You know, are these big companies like EA, are they potentially going to disappear? It doesn't look like it right now. They seem to be doing absolutely fine. They're making tons of money, they're releasing big games, they've got good studios going on. But further down the line, who knows? But you see, again, many of those companies probably see it coming. They'll be able to plan and work their way around it. And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a lot of backlash. There really doesn't. I mean, you know, we saw the stuff around the loot boxes within Star Wars Battlefront 2, but beyond that, I can't really think of anything that's had a significant backlash, despite how obviously distasteful it may have been. In the current state of affairs in the gaming industry, there doesn't seem to be a lot of people that are bothered by business practices, pricing or otherwise. Like I've said, for me personally, I really feel like something like Sea of Thieves is extremely overpriced for the content that's there, and they don't even have a roadmap, they don't have much planned in there, and I can't honestly understand how people can justify that price being there. But what bothers me a lot more is that I see people very regularly now defending, you know, it's kind of very similar to the whole YouTuber thing, where you've seen some of these YouTubers who have been involved in scandals, and it's kind of like their audience is split, even though anybody with a kind of reasonable conscience would be able to see that the stuff that they're doing is highly objectionable. Their audiences are split right down the middle, where half of them are like, this is a disgrace, I don't want anything to do with you, and then the other half are just defending it flat out, even though they're defending the indefensible. And the same goes for microtransactions. There was a time where microtransactions started to appear and people were like, this is bullshit, but developers and publishers just pushed it, and it kind of became the norm. And now what I do seem to see and hear is a younger generation of gamers going, oh yeah, I'm completely fine with microtransactions, because it's all they've known. It's just in games, and it's all that they know that there is there, which is why I keep saying over and over again, you've got to fight back against stuff like season passes by putting your foot down, contacting developers, making yourself aware of things on social media, telling companies on social media, linking people in, retweeting stuff, making it, visible. You've got to make it visible, your sort of distaste for these kind of things, because otherwise it continues. And it's why originally I was okay with the idea of cosmetic microtransactions, but now I am less okay with it. And the reason being is because what happens is you normalize that one thing and then you try to move it on to the next. And that's what they did with Star Wars Battlefront 2. They were like, oh okay, people are cool with microtransactions now, they're cool with cosmetic microtransactions. Why don't we push it a little bit further? Why don't we start making it so that actual mechanical game elements are in those boxes? And it's the same. Do you see what I mean? So they push it. They always try to push it to find where the line is, what people will accept. And the more you normalize something like just cosmetic microtransactions, the more then later down the line they'll try to push it just a little bit, until they can get their bloody foot in the door, and then you're fucked. And that's where we're headed towards if we're not careful. eBunny says, this is a topic I could probably talk about for hours, as it's something I've experienced with and have thought about a lot. Not just gaming addiction, but addiction in general. I wouldn't say that gamers are addicts necessarily, but I do think a lot of gamers are addicted to video games to some extent. And obviously people play games for different reasons, and for different amounts of time. Someone might play something once in a while in their spare time, somebody else might play a few hours a day, and for some people playing games is literally their job. Either way, I think that for a lot of people, video games, as well as any other form of entertainment, are an escape, a distraction away from reality, and if you're unable to keep this in check, it can eventually turn into an addiction. Also, I think many games for a long time now have had systems in them to keep players coming back, and in some cases this can go as far as actually manipulating the players through skinner boxes and such. But even if it's not that bad or obvious, a game can still have perhaps more subtle addictive elements. Modern progression systems, regardless of their intent or implementation, can be highly addictive. It's no surprise that so many people have been addicted to games like WoW, Hearthstone, COD, or Overwatch. And it's a question to ask whether or not the games industry even needs a little bit more oversight. I don't know about that in the UK, but when I think of something, but I mean, it can apply to anything. Any leisure activity can be addicting, depending on how it is, but it's true to say that in games, there's just a lot more systems and mechanics which are more likely to keep you coming back in. So like, again, with World of Warcraft, World of Warcraft was a game which I struggled very, very hard to get out of. I played it for about 5 years straight, and then I came back to it for another couple of years after that as well. And it's very, very hard to break out of. And sometimes you don't even know why. And I've said about this with Battlefield. Some people often say to me regularly, Lutin, why do you still play Battlefield when you go on about how much you don't like it all the time? And the answer is, I don't know why. I keep coming back to Battlefield, and I keep playing it. And sometimes I have good games there, but more often than not, I don't. Yet despite having often a bad round, a bad game in Battlefield, I still feel like I want to play. Like I'll finish a round, I'm like, I've got to play the next round, the next round, the next round, the next round, the next round. I don't know what it is, but something keeps pulling me in, keeps making me want to play it. And that's when you get into these subtle mechanics in games. There's little triggers, there's little clever tricks that get put into things which make you want to play, make you want to feel like you need to keep going. And that's what gambling companies do. That's what companies that make gaming machines, that's how gambling works. They use lots of flashy lights, shiny things, and little triggers and mechanics to make you want to feel like you need to keep playing. And often, I think a lot of those things can be subtly put into games, maybe not even intentionally. Maybe sometimes they just think, oh yeah, this would be fun for people to do, and so on and so on. But sometimes those goals become so intense, so, by making something difficult to achieve, you make people want it more badly, and some people get really hooked in on that. And as I say, it's just more, because you're in such a comfortable position, it's so easy to do with gaming, it's much more likely that stuff's going to happen. So games are a dangerous thing. But look, let's keep it real. I've been playing games since I was about 7 years old, and I have always been addicted to games. Something about games has always drawn me to them, and I've always just wanted to play for hours and hours and hours and hours. And many of you watching probably, I would imagine, are the same. Okay, Captor says, honestly, I think it's simple. There aren't that many good games. People are searching for a game that fulfills them, and they aren't finding it, so they try to find another and another and another. It's related to something you've mentioned before, LT, and it's the one more game thing, as I was just talking about right now with Battlefield, where you're really hoping the next game will have that sense of fulfillment that you got that time when your squad was working together and you were rewarded for your skill and your thought and such. but you don't get it in this game for some reason, and so it's one more game. And then I guess kind of abruptly, Kev, with regard to your question, AAA games are becoming more and more like movies. The pretty graphics and events like Levolution look amazing in trailers, but after you've seen the sun flare 200 times, it stops drawing the player to continue playing, to see it again. This is true, and that's why I keep saying that stuff like the behemoths in Battlefield 1, we don't need any fucking gimmicks in the next Battlefield. It needs to be a straight play game. But the problem is, they can't help themselves. They've got to put something in there to, you know, basically sell the game around. Like, it has to be like a kind of linchpin, essentially, alright? It's got to be something in there that they can kind of build their marketing scheme around. And that's why they do it. It's sure as hell not for gameplay reasons the majority of the time. This FPS gaming was the dream from the beginning of my gaming life with the VIC-20. For a lot of years it satisfied because it was new and awesome. However, if I purchase Battlefield 5, well, I'm really going to experience that I haven't a billion times before. There's no player-generated gameplay. Map design makes it even worse because it drives player traffic through the same areas constantly. Battlefield 1942, I could take 100 routes to get anywhere I wanted on the maps. While I can technically still do so in modern Battlefield games, the maps are designed in such a way that nobody really takes anything but the obvious path. Games like Rust, Sea of Thieves, Dual Universe, and so many other new kinds of games have more user-generated gameplay. Sea of Thieves needs more content, but the possibilities of interaction between players is nearly endless. Battlefield used to feel like that, but now it doesn't. He says, I love The Empire Strikes Back, but if I were to watch it 100 times in a row, I'd probably never want to see it or anything like it again. Debatable, #discuss. So, I don't think I can agree with everything in there, but what I can agree on for sure is that user-generated content is a really good thing. And I don't mean user-generated content in the producing YouTube, Twitch sense, but basically being able to take control of elements in a game and actually sort of form and, you know, improvise and direct them to your own needs and what you want to get out of a game is ultimately a really positive thing. Basically, I've had this idea for a while now that the way games are kind of headed towards, that they are to a degree delivering a foundation to the players. They're saying, okay, here is your starting point, now off you go. And that constraining players more and more doesn't necessarily lead to quality. It depends on what kind of game you're going for, it depends on the context and the genre of the game, of course, but more and more, and this comes from me doing a lot of Zeus, I just feel like and also for Squad, having, you know, kind of community-based servers where the admins can really take a lead and try to take things forward in a direction that they want to go in, and they can form small communities around that. I think that's the way to go. I think some of these very big games and these very big companies, they want to push things to like this giant global scale, and that can definitely work depending on the type of game that you're playing. But for me personally, I feel like the more constructive game, the more rewarding thing in terms of what you actually get out of the game, that comes from community-based play. That comes from people working together and developing a community and saying like, hey, you know, I know those guys are doing their thing, but we want to play the game like this. And games which have a more sandbox element to them, that really enables you to deliver that experience. Now, as I say, it does depend slightly on the genre. Something which has a very narrow focus of playstyle, like a battle royale, where it's like, hey, here's what you do, and here's what you're going to do. Now get on with it, you know. And beyond that, there's not too much scope. But it seems lately like the battle royale model is trying hard to kind of break out of that, and they're trying to do these kind of like, you know, random events which are happening, you know, periodically, and they're trying to sort of change it up a little bit because they realize quite quickly that, hey, you know, just doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, actually, despite the excitement that you can have, does actually get quite tedious after a while. But I guess to finish on Sea of Thieves, that's where they're going to have to realize, and they're going to have to do some hard work. If they didn't have a lot of content planned out, they need to get a fucking shift, because, you know, I said that Sea of Thieves on Twitch, in terms of its audience, and therefore perhaps, I always use Twitch as a vague gauge of kind of people's interest of things. Sea of Thieves has dropped heavily in terms of viewer count just within the first week. I said I'd give the game 2 to 3 weeks before it dropped quite significantly, and it's well on track for that. So be interested to see where Sea of Thieves is on Twitch in terms of views at prime time in about a week's time. So let's see where it is at that point in time. So that's it for this week, guys. That's Below the Line. Tell me what you think about leaning in games. Should leaning be a more default mandatory feature for FPS games? What does it give you as a player? Is it more beneficial, and does it suit every style of FPS? Tell me down in the comments below, guys, and thanks for watching. Thanks for enjoying the video. If you do, drop a like and check out all the links down below. I'll see you next time for some more Below the Line.